All right, we are very excited to have with us today Dr. Michael Greger of nutritionfacts.org. He is a physician, an author, and an internationally recognized leader in the plant-based movement, and he can talk about a number of very sophisticated public health issues. He's the author of How Not to Die, and he recently released the How Not to Die cookbook, both of which are blockbusters. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Greger.
So happy to be here.
Okay, so due to the brilliance of the low carbohydrate diet, many people with diabetes are terrified of eating fruit under the impression that fruit causes weight gain and oversecretion of insulin and insulin resistance. Talk to us about fruit and its role in diabetes.
Your background is making me hungry. Wow, I want that kind. I want to move in.
You're welcome anytime.
So where this comes from is the fact that industrial sugars, right? So table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, in excess contributes to some very serious issues such as hypertension, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and obesity. And so you say, wait a second. If sugar is bad, well, where does sugar come from? Sugar comes from fruit. There's sugar in fruit, and so therefore we should stay away from fruit. But you don't know until you put it to the test. And when people have actually put it to the test, you actually find the reverse is true. In fact, some studies down up to like 20 servings of fruit a day, and one doesn't see negative effects. In fact, one sees positive metabolic effects. So I have a video, how much fruit is too much, or if fruit has sugar, I don't know. If you just type in fruit and sugar into nutritionfacts.org, you can see all the studies themselves. Basically, if you give people a glucose challenge test, we have people chug down basically a glass of water with a tablespoon of table sugar in it, you see this big spike in blood sugars because it's such an unphysiological thing to do to ourselves, since we evolved for millions of years without such things. So much so we get this burst of insulin secretion, so much that we overshoot and actually can get a hypoglycemic dip afterwards, where our blood sugars actually drop below fasting, before we started drinking that sugar water. Our body freaks out a little bit, shoots some fat into our blood, these triglycerides, all sorts of bad metabolic effects. The question is, okay, now what if you take that exact same thing, your glass of sugar water, and then you add some fruit to it? In this case, they added some berries. And so they added, if I remember correctly, enough berries to add an entire another tablespoon of sugar worth of, but it was just fruit. I mean, sugar found in the fruit. So they added that to the sugar water and said, wait a second, all of a sudden there's so much more sugar, the spike should be even worse. But what happened? Actually, the spike was less. So adding more sugar in fruit form, in whole fruit form, in fact, it wasn't even, it was whole, it was just pureed berries. And so a less of a sugar spike did not get that overshoot, did not get the burst of fat into the bloodstream. And so actually mediated the effects. At first they thought it must be the fiber. The fiber in the berries must be gelling in the stomach, slowing the release of sugar into the small intestine. But then they tried it just with fruit juice, which is crazy, and found that the polyphenols, these phytonutrients found in fruit, can actually interfere with the absorption of sugar through the gut wall into the bloodstream, and so can slow the absorption of sugar throughout the small intestine. And so for this variety of reasons, eating sugar in whole fruit form, the way our bodies are intended to eat it, designed through millions of years of evolution to eat it, surprise, surprise, has beneficial effects. In fact, the Global Burden of Disease Study, largest study of human disease risk factors in history, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, found that the number one dietary risk factor in the world, the number one thing we're doing wrong, is it drinking too much soda? Is it eating too much bacon? No, the number one thing contributing to death and disability is inadequate fruit consumption. Fruit is so powerfully beneficial to our health. The number one dietary risk factor for death on the earth is inadequate fruit consumption. So what do we got to do? Stuff our face with as many fruits and vegetables as possible.
How many fruits do you eat on a daily basis on average?
As many as I can stuff. Now, oftentimes, you know, when the airline staff comes down the aisle, they don't offer me pretzels, cookie, or mangoes. But if they did, you know what I'd be choosing. So I just actually got back from a trip going around to these PBS stations. I got this new PBS special out, which is very cool. In fact, leaving again on Saturday. Unfortunately, you know, airport food courts are not the where you're going to get fruit. But so what do? I pack it with me, right? I mean, so I pack apples and dates in my bag, and so I'm chewing away while everyone else is eating their little disgusting pretzel sticks.
Okay, so we covered fruit. Now talk to us about eggs, because there's a lot of deceiving marketing that the egg board pushes out about the nutrition that's contained within eggs, specifically to convince the American public that eggs are quote unquote healthy and are a great source of protein. But the evidence-based research shows the exact opposite. Consuming eggs increases cardiovascular mortality, diabetes risk, cancer risk, and is directly related to an increase in LDL cholesterol. So for people living with diabetes, what should they know about eggs?
Yeah, increase in diabetes risk. I think particularly critical for this audience here. Now, we used to think, you know, it was, I don't know, what's bad about eggs? The cholesterol, right? But now, you know, we have there's a couple of revolutions going on in medicine. One is epigenetics. The fact that lifestyle and diet changes can actually turn on and off genes. So regardless of whatever kind of, you know, bad genetic cards we've been dealt, we can kind of reshuffle the deck with diet. And the other big revolution is the microbiome, our understanding of the role that the literally trillions of bacteria in our gut have on metabolism, mental health, immunity, all sorts of things. But it's not all good. Now, when we eat whole plant foods, fiber-containing foods, resistant starch-containing foods like beans and whole grains and fruit, vegetables, nuts, all whole plant foods, including mushrooms, we feed our good fiber munching bacteria, and they produce, we feed them, they feed us back with these short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate, which are absorbed back into our system, have all sorts of beneficial metabolic effects. Whereas when we feed them carnitine, found in red meat, they produce this toxic substance called trimethylamine, oxidized by our liver into TMAO, travels throughout our body, increases our risk of heart failure, kidney failure, heart attack risk, stroke, bad, toxic stuff. And then we realized it's the bacteria can also take choline, found predominantly in eggs, number one most concentrated source in American diet. So of both cholesterol and choline, take that choline and turn it into TMAO as well. Trimethylamine oxidized by liver into TMAO, circulates throughout our body, causes all sorts of havoc. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, no wonder there's these disease links between eggs and a variety of diseases, because it produces this toxic trimethylamine stuff. Now, if you take, someone who eats a plant-based diet, give them a steak with all that carnitine, they don't make any TMAO. Why? Because they don't have TMAO. They don't have meat-eating bacteria in their guts. They have fiber-eating bacteria in their guts. Now, of course, if you ate a steak every day, you would facilitate the growth of those steak-eating bacteria and make all these toxic secondary bile acids and TMAO, etc. But we need to foster the growth of our good bacteria, and in doing so, then all that really matters is what we eat on a day-to-day basis. So what you eat on your birthday, holiday, special occasions doesn't matter as much as every single day. Our body has a remarkable capacity to bounce back from injury. So as long as we're not regularly eating foods like eggs and meat, we're not going to be fostering the growth of these bad bacteria in our gut that can then take these food items and turn it into toxic materials.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, this is actually really helpful, because there's so many people in the world of diabetes that are convinced that they need to eat eggs in order to get protein. And there's also this giant focus on just eating more protein, because the more protein you consume, the more quote unquote stable your blood glucose becomes, which is a fallacy. So do you know anything specifically about protein in general, as opposed to just protein in general, as opposed to eggs, and how that can influence blood glucose control?
One of the reasons that we want to stay away from, refined grains and these added sugars is because, that exaggerated spike in our blood glucose then can lead to this high spike in insulin. Having high insulin levels isn't good for a variety of reasons. But if you're looking at insulin spikes, actually protein, like you take meat protein, you get a higher insulin spike, amount of insulin in your bloodstream after eating, meat protein than you do eating straight table sugar. People don't realize that. So even though you don't have the blood sugar spike eating the steak, you still get this big spike in insulin. And presumably the same kind of negative adverse consequences of having all this insulin in your bloodstream all the time. And it can exaggerate the blood sugar spiking effects of refined carbs. So having chicken with white rice gives you an exaggerated insulin response compared to just eating the white rice alone. So adding the protein actually made things worse as opposed to making things better. There's just so much. I'm so glad you're doing this series because there's just so much mythology and opinions and beliefs and myths and just craziness out there. And if we're all talking about some historic, JFK assassination or some kind of, okay, fine. People can have all sorts of crazy beliefs. But when it comes to something as life and death important as to what you put in your mouth, the number one cause of death and disability in the United States is our diet. Now bumping tobacco smoking to number 2. Cigarettes not only kill about 500,000 Americans every year, whereas our diet kills hundreds of thousands or more. So when it comes to buying a new toaster on the internet, fine, listen to the opinions of random strangers on the internet, right? But when it comes to the health and well-being of yourself and your family, if there's anything to make a decision based on evidence about, it should be about your health and longevity.
Couldn't agree with you more. So you released on your website, nutritionfacts.org, which, by the way, if you have not seen Dr. Greger's website, I highly recommend it. It's one of my absolute favorite websites of all websites on the internet. On nutritionfacts.org last year, you released a series of videos specifically about the connection between cow's milk protein and the development of type 1 diabetes and autoimmunity. Can you go into a little bit of detail here about what that connection actually is?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So the question was, why is there this link between cow's milk exposure in infancy and the development of type 1 diabetes, which is diabetes not making insulin in the first place. There's been damage to your insulin-making cells in your pancreas. So it's not a problem with insulin resistance, but insulin secretion in the first place. And then you are dependent on insulin injections your entire life. And so the thought is that these beta cells in your pancreas, these insulin-producing cells in your pancreas, get caught in this autoimmune-friendly fire when being exposed to certain foreign proteins, like these bovine proteins, whether it's actually the bovine insulin in milk or some of the bovine proteins like casein in the milk. Our body mounts an attack against it because it considers it to be foreign, particularly in infancy, where we have a very leaky gut, which is good because we want to absorb all those immunoglobulins from our mother's breast milk. So we get this passive immunity. Our mother has built up this great immunity with all these great antibodies against everything on the planet. We can then pass them along to the newborn who hasn't been exposed to anything yet. And so that's where we have evolved to have a very leaky gut in infancy, so we can actually absorb intact proteins like immunoglobulins, which are part of our immune defense system. The problem is if we're exposed to these foreign proteins, like cow milk proteins, they can be absorbed to our system too, and our body says, "What is this? Why is there cow insulin in my body?" And so, in attacking the cow insulin, may actually go and kind of accidentally attack our own pancreas. Once those cells are scarred up and killed off, then you're left in this type 1 diabetes situation. These studies are difficult to do. So there's a whole bunch. The problem is, infants exposed to cow's milk formula are, what's the big confounding factor? They're not getting breast milk. So maybe they have type 1 diabetes, not because they're being exposed to cow's milk formula, but just because they're not getting the protective factors in breast milk. So what they do is these studies using a hydrolyzed formula. So hydrolyzed cow's milk formula, where they chop up all the little bovine proteins into these small enough pieces that it doesn't cause an autoimmune reaction. Then you can actually do these randomized controlled trials to see if there actually is a benefit. And so I have a whole series of videos going into the kind of the detective story of what it is about cow's milk exposure that may increase the risk of getting type 1 diabetes, which we've certainly got a lot better at treating, but still can be a serious lifelong illness that someone has to deal with.
So you often tell people that moderation is not the answer when it comes to diet. So we love your statement, your take on this situation. Can you explain what you mean when you say moderation is not the answer?
Okay, well, so first you have to understand that, for example, having a normal cholesterol level, like all the time, people go to their diet. You know, I talk about, you know, I meet someone in an elevator, on a, you know, an airplane. They're like, oh yeah, healthy, yeah. I got a normal cholesterol. Don't worry, my blood pressure is normal. Okay, having a normal cholesterol in a society where it's normal to drop dead of a heart attack, it's the #1 killer of men and women. You don't want normal, you want a safe cholesterol level. Having a normal blood pressure, right, where people are dying from strokes and kidney failure and going blind. I mean, no, you don't want to be normal in a society that's dropping dead from this pandemic of chronic disease. You want to have an ideal level. You want to have a safe level. And so, I mean, when it comes to moderation in, diabetes, for example, you know, asking our diabetic patients to make moderate changes in diet can leave them with moderate blindness, moderate kidney failure, moderate amputation, maybe just a few toes or something, right? I mean, moderation in all things is not necessarily a good thing, right? And so I talk about this famous cell metabolism study that showed that men and women middle age, eating lots of animal protein, have 70 times the risk of getting diabetes, but those just eating a moderate amount of animal protein, just have 23 times the risk of dying from diabetes compared to those. So yeah, moderation kills. We can do moderation in a lot of areas of our life. But when it comes to like moderation in things that are hurting us, we really should try to cut down as much as possible. I mean, doctors don't tell people to, moderate their cigarette habit. They say quit. It's not good for you. Yes, a pack a day is better than 2 packs a day. Okay, but really, the difference between 1 pack a day and 2 packs a day is nothing compared to 1 pack a day and 0 packs a day.
Got it. That's very clear. Okay, so our last question here. What is the #1 challenge that you see people face when it comes to lifestyle change, and what would you recommend to help them overcome that problem?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's ignorance. It's confusion. People just don't know. People get conflicting information all the time. One day, coffee's good for you. The next day, coffee's bad for you. This is not by accident, right? I mean, this is a classic tobacco industry tactic, is to muddy the waters, confuse people. They have this famous memo, doubt is our product, right? Where the tobacco industry internally was talking about how we don't have to convince people smoking is good for you. We just have to introduce enough doubt. Yeah, some people say it's good, some people say it's bad, sometimes there's controversy. In hopes people will just kind of throw up their hands and, eat whatever's put in front of them, right? I mean, this is what, the processed food industry loves this kind of, this confusion. Whereas actually, there's been this clear scientific consensus going back decades on the core elements of healthy eating and healthy living. In fact, this is confusion in the realm of nutrition and the corrupting influence of commercial interests, such that Dr. David Katz at the Yale Prevention Center pulled together the top experts in the world, hundreds of the top leading nutrition experts in the world, like Walt Willett, head of nutrition at Harvard, to agree on a consensus statement on really what is the healthiest diet. This is their True Health Coalition. And you can go to the website, you can read it, and it talks about we should center our diets around whole plant foods, the healthiest foods on the planet, which is which is fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, whole grains, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, mushrooms, basically real food that grows out of the ground. These are our healthiest choices, and I am totally jealous, and I want to move in. Look at that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. This is fantastic. So, we totally value your participation, and, you have so much knowledge. Your website, nutritionfacts.org, I literally watch that when I have nothing to do because there's so much valuable information. I just like, what did Gregor put out today? And then I go to it. So, you're doing a service for not only us and for the diabetes community, but for the world.
Well, keep up the good work yourself. Anything I can do to support your great works, you just let me know.